How could the dealers know what they were dealing? Almost 3 months later, after my son's death, this report verbally was given to me. This conveniently backs up Kendall's second autopsy report. I'd like to know what has changed. I had been given a piece of paper that I was smart enough to copy that stated Kendall had bronchial pneumonia and a heart condition. There is now an epidemic of informants since Kendall's public demise, blaming him for being a major heroin dealer and user for over the last year of his life in Prescott, Arizona. When the 3 different police organizations tried to convince me of this, I simply asked how many track marks were on my son's body. 1. This leads me to believe that the needle mark had been put randomly on my son was in a panic without thought by whoever was with him before the police found my son. I now believe the police walked in to a hampered crime scene, which has degraded my son's short life. I soon hope to, with an independent medical examiner and private investigator, and perhaps a lawyer, properly address these false accusations. Street rumors have said that Kendall and the girl before him, who supposedly died of a heroin overdose, were given hot shots. Yet there's no investigation about this. Kendall was the 5th person to die in Prescott, Arizona, not the 1st. There were 4 more deaths occurring after his. This information was kept low-key, under wraps, unknown to the general public. My special needs son, Kendall Thomas Linne, who has no record and has never been in trouble in his whole life, has now, after his death, been blamed for events that have transpired from the criminals and informants who overpowered him in the last month of his life. These unreliable sources are being listened to by the authorities. The proof I have given in Kendall's favor, which I had found on Kendall's computer and turned in to these authorities, has never even been looked at. Kendall was a special education student in Prescott Unified School District for over 10 years. At my son's funeral, I found out that Kendall had written for an English class a composition about a boy that overdosed and died of heroin. He handed that paper in for grading. This was in the same month Kendall found himself trapped and couldn't find himself a way out. In his backpack, in his English folder, was a little green booklet on suicide with drawings that Kendall made. I believe this also was a graded English assignment. A rock and roll prayer to God for help and forgiveness. This was not of my son's normal nature. This was a cry for help. Was I informed by the schools? No. Could my son's life have been saved? Kendall's school counselor of 4 years did not respond to the first 3 days of my call. When I did reach him, instead of extending condolences, he told me that it was the parents' responsibility concerning drugs about their children, not the schools. I was dumbfounded. What was this counselor's commitment? I replied to him, "You're right, but if the school notices irrational behavior from one of its own students, then isn't it the school's responsibility to notify the parents so they can be responsible?" There was no answer from him. He just told me he would, as requested, give this English paper to a person of trust that I had delivered to me. I had very little contact with this man throughout Kendall's education. I had chosen to directly contact the special education teachers that were involved with my son and his educational life. I believe these teachers all have had my son's best interest at heart. From that point on, I never talked to Kendall's counselor again. I spoke instead to the detective of Prescott High School. The school detective gave this composition to law enforcement the day after Kendall's death, October 4th, 2007. Why couldn't they give me that composition before Kendall died? I was his legal guardian for educational purposes until he graduated from high school and in 11th grade signed the 3-year contract that is involved with special education students. At my son's school, it's called 10 to 4. That's when the heroin, crack, cocaine, and pot is dealt on school grounds. The school says it's not their responsibility. If one of their very own hadn't whispered in my ear, I wouldn't have known about Kendall's English composition. Kendall's death was publicized on Channel 12 News and NBC Nightly National News before the autopsy report was completed. I believe that they adjusted the second autopsy report to suit the mistakes the authorities made for public benefit. I wrote a request to the Chief of Detectives of Prescott Police Department to obtain all records, including pictures of my son's case. I handed this in personally at the police station to the secretaries. As of this day, January 8th, 2008, 3 months after Kendall's death, I still have not received the requested information. Kendall has become the easiest target in Prescott. The lack of ethical and professional responsibility by the people who oversaw his education is inhumane and non-caring. Why have these people chosen a field dealing with the outcome of our children's lives? The drug system of Prescott, Arizona is supplied by Mexican heroin and Las Vegas crack cocaine. This is delivered to Thomas Road in Phoenix at different pickup points. Runners from Prescott pick up these drugs in Phoenix, transporting them back to Prescott and hiding them in the homes of gullible and unprotected kids. The drug cartel guards and manipulates these kids through fear by keeping bullies who are given free dope and chump change to oversee, harness, and threaten these kids into control through mind games. The tattoo parlor in Prescott fronts the monetary advancements for these dope runs to pay the Mexican and Vegas cartels. These profits pay for them to keep drawing children into the tattoo parlor, letting these kids become involved. These drug dealers and their bullies were at the funeral parlor, the memorial, and my son's house after my son's death, making sure that anybody with knowledge of them would not speak up. The intimidation I witnessed to Prescott teenagers during Kendall's viewing and Hampton's funeral parlor was blatant. It continued verbally and physically for many days after Kendall's cremation, making sure that these people were heard and seen so no one would speak up. I asked the undercover police to attend these services. They did not, out of respect, they said, for Kendall and me. Once again, these criminals were given an opportunity to victimize